Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and a little bit of a different sort of article for tonight. And this one is going to be a little bit quite a lot shorter, but it's actually going to serve as something of a... it's more of a gateway introduction to certain terminologies and phrases that people need to get acquired to understand the differences in the sort of people that not just hover around Chris, but also hover around quite a lot of other people. So let's just get this out of the way. This is what's known as the Unholy Tetrad. Pro tip. As tempting as it may be, it is best not to assign labels to certain people that contact Chris. Instead, the acts they themselves commit should be documented, as they are ultimately much more substantial to understanding Christery. The Unholy Tetrad, formerly Trinity and Quintet, is a term used by Christorians to refer to four common practices some orbiters may do that often frowned upon by the quick sphere. Those include white knighting, which it means trying to protect Chris from misguided purposes, and this often involves downplaying and overlooking Chris's negative traits. A-logging, obnoxiously overstating or exaggerating Chris's negative traits. This often, but not necessarily, includes comparing oneself to Chris or wishing physical harm or legal action on him. Enabling, feeding into Chris's self-destructive habits, and weaning, trying to and failing to annoy Chris. Jacob Soklis and Kenneth Irwin Engelhardt are today the only individuals to have famously done all of these to some extent. So, let's just do this one step at a time. White Knights. White Knights are people who feel sorry for Chris and feel that they need to help him overcome his demons. Out of all the groups in the Unholy Tetrad, White Knights are by far the most benevolent, but many are naive to the fact that getting Chris to halt his self-destructive lifestyle is going to take a lot more than a message on social media or a Patreon donation. There is nothing wrong feeling sorry for Chris, necessarily, but without a combination of really tough love and proper resources, White Knights can unknowingly be as dangerous to Chris as the other three groups, sometimes worse. Especially if they play along with Chris's belief that Quickville and its characters are real, or donate large amounts of money that Chris will blow away on conventions, toys, and video games. The level of devotion by White Knights vary greatly. The most moderate either back down or ask for a second opinion before making a fool of themselves. But the most fanatical may defend Chris even when it is clear as day that Chris was in the wrong. Criteria. A person who fervently defends Chris even after it is obvious that Chris was in the wrong. A person who constantly praises Chris even when such praise doesn't fit his overall character or skills. A person who believes that Chris his poor decisions can be in some ways overlooked because of his disability. Spoiler alert, it's not always this case. And a person who attempts to paint themselves as heroic in the Chris Chan saga, despite having done many morally questionable acts and lying about it to gain fame. A-logs. A-logs, or A-loggers, are people who express disproportionate levels of hatred for Chris, often wishing misery or physical harm onto him. The term comes from Anthony A. Log Legato, who would constantly boast about his superiority over Chris and other people, and attempt to frame Chris as evil and not naive in reality. A-logs often sit in the opposite extreme of White Knights. While White Knights try and fail to defend and help Chris, A-logs try and fail to compare Chris to actual tyrants like Fanoste Barbarossa and Nicole Cessassure. One does not have to mention another certain tyrant to understand how A-logging against Chris makes no sense. Some weens and malicious enablers may adopt one or more tactics from A-logs as part of their attempt to ruin Chris's life. Examples include flooding listings of establishments that Chris visits with negative reviews about him, or pure extortion in an attempt to brute force misery or physical harm onto Chris. Criteria. A person who tries to compare Chris to someone who is genuinely evil, such as a mass murderer or a war criminal. A person who tries to interrupt or interpret Chris's flaws as a threat to society, rather than as a result of bad parenting. A person who celebrates or gloats when something bad happens to Chris. A person who tries to brute force misery onto Chris via means of mental or physical harm. The enablers. Enablers are people who consistently feed into Chris's bad habits. Unlike all other groups, enablers come in all kinds of varieties. Some play along with Chris's beliefs about himself and the rest of the world. Others will donate money to him despite him admittedly wasting any kind of money he already owns. All enablers do these things, and many others with various intents and purposes. Enablers usually agree with, and form a religion of, Chris's belief that Quickville and his electric hedgehog Pokemon are real in the so-called dimension of Scene 197, where all other fictional characters and OCs live, plus a multitude of other dimensions, and that he is the CPU goddess of that dimension. They also encourage Chris's beliefs that the dimensional merge, the apocalyptic event wherein Dimension 1218, the dimension we live in, merges with C197 into Dimension 1C-211987 to bring fictional characters and OCs into the real world, will happen in the very near future. Enablers will frequently donate large amounts of money that Chris will blow away to fuel his Peter Pan lifestyle. However, some enablers and weens, such as the idea guys, exploited Chris's weak grasp on reality for nefarious purposes. Enablers are the most harmful to Chris because it only, and I mean only, fuels his already hyperinflated ego, in which he answers to no one but himself, and that people will always provide for him in all cases. In the case of the idea guys, their exploitation of Chris's naivete not only corrupted the Solitude law, but their extortion nearly caused financial ruin in May 2018. In the 23 years since the creation of Solitude, Chris's grasp on reality has deteriorated to a point that some white knights face having to play along with Chris's beliefs to get in touch with him, and even after there is no guarantee that Chris will follow their advice. The works of the enablers are so well recognized by Chris himself that he refers to them as officially as devotees of Chris Chan Sonichu, or docs, or more simply, devotees. Criteria: a person who encourages Chris to continue his Peter Pan lifestyle in some way, a person who pretends to believe or genuinely believes Chris's interpretation of reality as fact and are probably more insane than Chris, a person who exploits Chris's weak grasp on reality for malicious purposes, and a person who donates money to Chris despite numerous warnings from other people telling him not to. Weens. Weens are people who try and fail to troll Chris or interfere with his life. Examples of weaning include trying to get him banned from places or websites that he visits, persistently spamming Chris's social media feeds with pickles and similar outdated memes just to annoy him, or trying to get Chris kicked out of his house by getting the local authority to condemn his house for demolition. However, there is a lot of confusion as to what counts as weaning. Some observers tend to erroneously use the term against any trolling attempt since the death of Bob Chandler in 2011. Even if it succeeds, some erroneously use the term against anyone who contacted Chris, even if they do not even fit the criteria of the unholy. Regardless of how the term is used, trying to annoy Chris is utterly pointless, as Chris is no longer negatively fazed by most trolling attempts. Attempts to ruin his life are also a very bad idea, especially following the devastating impact of the idea guys and the escalating financhu crisis. The same goes for trying to harass places for allowing Chris as a customer or patron. Some now have started to preemptively ban him, since they either have better things to do than deal with wannabe trolls flooding their social media channels. Criteria for these include a person that tries and fails to annoy Chris or to do harm in some manner and makes a fool out of themselves as a result of this, a person that brags about trying to annoy Chris or ruin his life, a person who constantly blurts outdated memes such as Julie and Ian Brandon Anderson in order to appear relevant. And, well, there are probably like even larger articles on these sorts of things. Well, yeah, absolutely. Well, which, to be honest, they deserve like entire articles on their own. And it's not just in relation to Chris that these sort of terms come to be. And there's no doubt going to be a series of videos that's going to be like documenting a lot more of these in more detail. But for what they are, that's like the majority of things to cover. Those are sort of like the four real main sort of like trolls to Christorians and everything else in between that you probably need to know. And I know it was going to be a bit of a shorter article, but I'm doing this because I want to showcase to people that don't be like any of these. Just leave Chris well the hell alone and just observe it from the comfort and safety of your own home. And don't be like Chris. I know I can't really emphasize that enough, but there it is. And with all that being said and done, I hope all of you guys have enjoyed this quick and simple little read, and I cannot wait to talk to you guys again next time. Well, I know this sort of day was coming, because now we have to move on to talking about a particularly hotbed of topic and controversy when it comes to Christian, and that are his enablers. Those sorts of people, the people that don't tell Chris the truth. They try and feed into his delusions. And by the way, can I just say, before we even get anywhere started with this, there is a huge difference between not telling people the truth and saying things to make them feel better. However, here's as far as I work out. If people were to tell me, for example, the truth, they would just come out and say the truth. I'm openly encourage people to just straight up tell me the truth. And I'm not telling, but in terms of people who say stuff they want to make me feel better, usually what people do, from my experience, is they tell me, well, look at what you've done, look at where you've come from, look about exactly all you've managed to accomplish in this period. You should be very proud of that, and you shouldn't stop. You should. I know it may seem as though you want to slow down and stuff like that, but here's the thing: just take 5 minutes, just take a moment to think things over, and then go at it again. It's to remind people not to give up. It's not trying to tell people they're perfect, and if one person says no, then that must mean they are automatically in the wrong, or it's anything personal, which might be the case in terms of how we come to Chris. But let's just get straight to this. Enablers, or devotees of Christian solitude, or docs as it's referred to as Chris has termed them, are those who encourage quite openly Chris's negative behavior and or self-destructive habits. Enablers can be divided into two main classes, the first being financial enablers throwing money at Chris, and the second being the fantasy enablers endorsing Chris's grandiose delusions. They are not necessarily limited to doing these. The overall characteristic that defines all enablers is that they perform an action with the sole purpose of encouraging Chris to live like a child, whether it be encouraging him not to be employed, providing him his most basic needs, role-playing with him, and much, much more. Some enablers and white knights fall into a subgroup referred to as anti-trolls, those who try to ward other trolls and tetrad members away from Chris to have him for themselves. Those are not to be confused with counter-trolls, who primarily fight against trolls to protect Chris, rather to troll him themselves. Kind of a counterintuitive thing, because Chris is very, very determined about who he decides to listen to and, well, who he doesn't. Meanwhile, here's Helena Forenza, a fantasy enabler who feeds into Chris's delusions that Magi-chan is real. Well, used to. Because I've spoken to Helena myself on and off a couple of times in the last couple of months. Yeah, she doesn't do that sort of thing anymore because, well, because for reasons we'll get into. So, as you can see, there's a lot of things to cover, so let's start with gatekeeping. Gatekeeping refers to controlling access to Chris. It is used by trolls to prevent white knights and wannabe trolls from interfering, and by white knights to prevent trolls from contacting Chris. The Miscreants troll group, for example, actively inferred with white knight attempts to help Chris by deleting their emails before Chris could read them, or by manipulating Chris to believing the white knights were leaking information. The Watchmen, a white knight / enabler group, tried to gatekeep Chris from these trolls. In the case of Larry Vaughn, they pointed out Chris shouldn't interact with him, though Chris insisted. In the case of Jacob Sockness, however, they had Chris record Chris releases a statement regarding Jacob Sockness to discourage Sockness from completing his trip to see Chris. Fantasy enablers. Chris's grip on what is real and what is being fed to him was never that robust to begin with, and has eroded even further after years of being deliberately misled. It has wasted away so much to an extent that he is nearly incapable of distinguishing seemingly even what ideas come from his head and what came from others. Enablers exploit this fact by presenting Chris with their own invented information about the dimensional merge, or Chris's imaginary friends, validating his thoughts and convincing him that he is not alone. A prime example of this is Jacob Sockness, who used fictional dialogue between various characters, between Chris's characters and his own imaginary pantheon. Chris fully believed that this dialogue was legitimate, because of course he would, and expressed that he had heard it himself. Collectively, these enabler fabrications are known as the cult of the idea guys, for they had their root in the idea guys' example and have become the basis of Chris's religious beliefs. This pseudo's cult's name is meant to poke fun at how Chris had incorporated all of his beliefs and turned them into a religion, where followers worship him as their god, since the Idea Guy saga showed to everyone by mid-2018 that Chris really was this gullible. The go-to method for those trying to influence Chris has been to act as enablers of his delusions, replacing the previous method of posing as sweethearts. Yeah. Financial enablers. Besides sanctioning his belief in his own divinity, there is one other way that enablers have found in winning Chris over, through his wallet. Though his situation is not nearly as dire as during the financhu crisis some years ago, Chris remains as irresponsible with money and adamant not to work as always. As a result, it is always precarious at best, providing him with the money he regularly requests, whether though lavishing him with expensive gifts, buying his overpriced shoddy merchandise, or donating monthly for comics he does not want to make, is a technique used by enablers who can afford it, such as Sarah and Steve, and even some who cannot, as Ali Hirschberg, to present themselves to Chris as being kindly and selfless, often in combination with worshipping and joining in his role-playing. Over the years, Chris has gotten thousands from his audience in the form of donations and considerations. He has received thousands more in sales through storefronts such as eBay and Etsy. As the notice on our homepage suggests, the Quickie strongly advises against giving Chris money. Yes, and that is a hill I'm willing to die on as well. Don't do it. He doesn't care, and he'll waste it. Because after well over 42... I'll say that after 42 years, you think the idea of financial responsibility would have occurred to Chris at some point roughly in his late teens and early 20s. Well, you would be very sorely mistaken. For example, a laptop computer from a Weening in North Carolina, date received August 2011. Chris spoke about it as in gratitude for a person in North Carolina. A common theory is that the laptop had been infected with a keylogger, but Chris outsmarted the Ween by upgrading the computer. Amount $500 from Kiwi Farms, date received January 2014. Donated by fans after the house fire. Yeah, by the way, after all of that, the first thing Chris did is that he got in touch with Noel, who also attached a letter with the box of supplies and the $500 money order. And the first thing that Chris did was, "Hey, Dodo Brain, you did not sign the money, the shipment, the money order that came in the big box, and the bank is unable to do anything about it. And have it make out another thing." Yeah, basically, Chris's first impression was literally to scat and spit in the direction of Noel, like a cat on a wall. That's the reason why it's, even as far back as 2014, people were because despite the fact that Chris burned his own house down himself, well, by accident, but it was Chris who was the one who, threw the spark and all that. $150 from fans, September 2014. From a Kickstarter campaign in which Chris explicitly stated he would use it to buy Legos. Why anybody would send as much as that, I couldn't tell you. $1,000 from D-Stex in September 2015, donated during the climax of his review series of Sonichu to fund the production of new pages for the comic. Chris used the money to buy a new bed, arguably one of his only sensible purchases in recent years, but then failed to keep his side of the deal for almost 2 years. Yeah, you're right, he literally, and he was called out on this, that he was commissioned. This isn't really so much like a donation, it's more of a commission order in any cases, but it's what it is. $500 from Sonic Rainboom, a Kiwi Farms user, also from September 2015. Chris was sent a Visa card with $500, later admitted doing it to get interesting content. And what it turned out is that Rainboom spent $500 to find that Chris liked McDonald's. Yeah, if you want to see what the receipt is for all this, it's literally just McDonald's, Super Center, Sheets. So I think there's like maybe a Sonic in here somewhere as well, but it's literally just McDonald's. And interestingly, CVS Pharmacy for $87. It may be argued that actually going to the pharmacy for like medication, maybe possibly for Bob, was also a smart idea, all things considered. It might have also been for the fact that Chris was pseudo going under reassignment treatment. Well, pseudo is the word I'd use. Hundreds, mostly weens, summer of 2016. During the financhu crisis, a pattern formed of Chris begging for money, then briefly stating that he had received donations before begging for some money. Yeah, the basis for this are not necessarily clear, but however, Chris seemed to be going back and forth on, did he need money? Well, if he did, then why was he spending on it on extortionate prices for Legos on eBay? So, a lot of people are not particularly impressed, both before and after, when Chris was just throwing money left, right, and centre and basically crying wolf. $2,650 from selling the Relics of Fail. August 2016 onwards, which included a Megatron, Chris selling his Megatron pistol, the Sonic Totem, the Pokewalker of Fail, and the She Came for Quick.jpg image, which $50, $1,500, $100, and $1,000 as part of a set. Then there was also $4,816.43 from Patreon, which started December 2016 to August of 2021. So 4.5 years. Chris earned pledges from fans and weens every month, and Chris very rarely updated his Patreon. So basically, this was, if in theory, even if you were to donate, let's say, $4.81 a month to Chris, that would be $4.81 you would never be seeing again. And Chris didn't particularly seem that bothered or cared that great deal, because by the time Chris's Patreon was shut down, it was somewhere close to about 500 whole days Chris went without actually updating his Patreon to meet his paid obligations, because Chris will literally do anything to avoid work. Something that probably enablers should have seen the writing on the wall. $1,000 from selling binders of old Pokemon and UFS cards, January 2018 to 2019. 4 binders of cards, at least one was purchased by a seller hoping to resell the individual cards. $100 from selling a stained page of Sonichu issue 14, which from February 2018, which literally is just selling his old trash. And this isn't even one of those, one man's trash and all that. No, this is Chris literally just selling his garbage for pennies. $1,300 from Jack Jankowski, April 2018. Jack gave Chris $1,200 for a luxury trip to the 2018 BronyCon in the hopes that he would get to meet him there. Chris thanked him for the money in I have been paid, so we'll go to see, seriously to be determined. Jack also paid $100 for a video, which Chris decided to bookend with unrelated begging announcements. I'm sure Jack must have been absolutely frothing at the mouth at something like that. $1,000 from Miss Cherry in July of 2018. tried the pay-to-play method to being Chris's next sweetheart and failed, and blew $1,000 in the process. And I don't even remember if, like, the guard dogs or, you know, the watchmen were even involved during this period. Well, certainly not what they were trying to do here. It's about $391 from Ali Hirschberg in the summer of 2018. It's about 3 hours' wages for me. I don't mind spending that on some Christery. During summer of 2018, an anonymous VRS Davison said in YouTube's comment section that she decided to spend $200 to buy an old blanket from Bob on eBay because she somehow considered it a piece of Christery. It evidently was not enough to pay a ridiculous sum of money for one blanket, as when Bob put more blankets up for sale. VRS Davison purchased another one for $100 plus $25 shipping. In October 2019, Ali Hirschberg revealed that she purchased them through a US proxy. In November 2019, she paid for a 41 set of Twilight Sparkle's secret chipfic folder cards and gave $50 for a Magi-chan medallion. $500 from Jill Duncan of February 2019. Jill Duncan pledged $500 per month to Chris's Patreon. Quite generous. Asking to speak to Chris. Then cancelled the pledge 10 days later, but because Chris's Patreon account is set to upfront payments, Chris still got the initial $500 and used it to purchase a replacement Xbox. Why, I don't know. Yes, an Xbox when you have a mortgage to pay as well. There is no indication Chris ever spoke to Jill as she requested. $400 from Sarah and Steve, spring 2019. They bought Chris a Nintendo Switch, which cost $300, and gave him $100 on Patreon. Also claiming to have funded a room for hire at the 2019 BronyCon, which was $600, but pulled it due to Chris not paying attention to them. Yeah, and by the way, the Switch that Chris opened in a video, and Chris also got a small little purse as well from Sarah and Steve. Despite the fact that this happened and all that, Chris opened the video without looking really ecstatic or even saying thank you for what he'd just been given for nothing. That's kind of always been a bit of a universal issue as well for Chris as well, is that as the years have gone by, his ego, he has not become more humble, he's become even more egotistical because it doesn't cost anything to say thank you and stuff like that. I'm sure that he could have kept a lot more doors open if he had actually changed, because he knew he probably had no choice. But Chris is one of those people where he believes the idea that, you know, beggars can be choosers as well, not the other way around. Minus $2,000 from Joseph Draft in April of 2019. According to the creator of the Chris Chan, A Comprehensive History documentary, which would be Gino Samuel, who was approached by Draft before the now infamous trailer was relisted, in order to get footage for a documentary, he had paid Chris and Bob an undisclosed amount, assuming that the Kickstarter was meant to cover the costs already made. The budgeted $2,000 as payment for the collaborators is the maximum amount Chris and Bob could have been given, from the information available. $200 from David 906379747, commissioned in May of 2019, was commissioned Chris via Twitter for a Solitude medallion, selling out $200 in order to get Chris's attention. Medallions were $30 each when Chris sold them on eBay in 2014. Became a Twitter white knight for Chris until Chris mass blocked some perceived trolls, including David. That must have... yeah. Paying all that much and then Chris just blocks you no matter what. So that's like... yeah, Chris will screw over the people who will actually try and defend him as well. That's nuts. $600 from a BronyCon donor of July 2019. After Chris repeatedly begged on Twitter for $600 to fund a hotel room after his previous plan fell through with Sarah and Steve, who had ghosted him earlier because Chris kept ignoring them, a fan just donated to Chris. But still, $600, that's like nearly working 8 whole days. For me, that's like nearly working 8 whole days for nothing. And I'm not about that. Why Chris couldn't get off his arse and actually go to work and, bring that amount home himself is a good point. $190 from Luke in October of 2020. A fan from Pennsylvania named Luke paid Chris $190 to autograph a variety of items which he intended to sell for profit. Chris delivered the signed goods to Luke's house personally. Then we have unknown Weening from August 2021 to March of 2023. Various fans have been making donations to Chris while in jail. Chris claims that he used this money to pay back the remainder of the $750 he stole from Barbara when he was forced out of his house in July of 2021, as well as to buy numerous items from the jail's commissionary shop. These included clothing, toiletries, writing materials, radio batteries, 2 Turkish prayer rugs, and numerous soft drinks and food items. Chris estimated his jail expenses to be about $50 per week. In the jail call from November 1st, Chris makes reference to one particularly generous donation he had received. Total, from what he had received from as far back as 2011 to what we know, $17,806.43. Meaning that Chris received, without having actually to really properly work, nearly, from what I could work out, nearly 8.5 months of me going to work, and he received that in the span of 10 years. If it's, again, a kind of a shame, really, because when you think about it, like, you really begin to think about this, Chris maybe possibly could have added a 0 onto the end of this. And Chris could have been making nearly over $100,000 in like 14 odd years. But he didn't, because he had really no leisure or desire for it. Because if he did, he would have just got on with it. Maybe the idea that Chris didn't really believe in himself, or he was just too lazy to even consider the notion, is one and another, I suppose. Motives for enabling Chris. There are several motives people make for enabling Chris. These include the following. To profit off of the community surrounding Chris, many of these enablers are opportunistic hacks who aim to use Chris's platform to launch their career. These people do not have the talent required to make anything worthwhile and bait Chris into talking about them to help launch their career. A recent enabler, Ben Saint, badly attempted to develop a saga of his own within Christry by copying what Alec Benson Leary did, which was to promote his own media and make money off of the fools who would buy that stuff. To do this, he fed into Chris's delusions and added some of his own characters into the Sonichu comics. Joining the creative communities surrounding Chris. Never a good idea. Pro tip. Nobody is stopping you from making fan media. If you want to, then by all means do so, but just try to make sure Chris himself doesn't see it. Observers of Chris often include people who enjoy drawing, animation, fanfic writing, cosplay, and the like as a hobby. While many will post their artwork at places strictly for discussing Chris, such as the Kiwi Farms or Reddit, to keep their distance from Chris, enablers approach Chris directly with their fan art on Twitter or Discord, with the intent of seeking his opinion. Despite knowing full well he has issues distinguishing reality from fantasy, and will interpret their artwork as it is happening literally over time, these enablers built up a community for sharing their artwork, with the side effect of affirming Chris's fantasies. Attention whores. Some of these enablers desperately seek attention, and approve from Chris is something they crave for the most. They want attention, and they obviously don't get it that at home. So the quickie is the next best alternative to get it. People such as MKR Nightv, Helena Forenza, Jacob Sockness, Sarah and Steve, and Richard Righteous come under this category. They often ardently defend Chris's beliefs about being an all-powerful goddess and getting into lengthy arguments with others over their actions. to make Chris produce content artificially. For most people, it would be utterly despicable to manipulate someone as mentally ill as Chris, let alone so that he can become a means for their enjoyment. For the enablers with more spiteful intents in mind, they would argue that the reason they are further deluding Chris is because it would encourage him to provide more content. They would tell Chris all kinds of nonsensical stories just so that he can act like their own personal lolcow to laugh at. I'm just supporting him/her/them. Eshel, seen here donating $10 to Chris, shows all the hallmarks of enabler, in that they pretend to be a fan and hope their financial donations will make Chris do what they want. In reality, Chris is most likely using their cash to buy video games. Actually, while we're on this subject, just a quick timeout here. I remember 53 weeks ago, it was a Sunday night, and I was heading home from work on the bus. How many of you guys have ever watched a YouTuber called Tactical Bacon Productions? He's now on to 100,000 subscribers. He mostly does video game essays and content revolving around Twisted Metal, God of War, and just some little odd topic of the day and stuff like that. And I donated $5 to his ranking every God of War weapon ranked from worst to best, mostly because I was in a very good mood and I felt quite charitable on that sort of day, and I donated him $5 saying thank you so much for all your hard work. And well, I kind of felt glad and proud that I did that, because it was a really good video and all that, and it obviously took him a while to make, so I just decided it was just the done thing, if that makes sense. And by the way, I do that for someone who actively puts a lot of time and effort into the things that they do, and their community is growing day by day. So that's the sort of thing I don't have an issue with, because I do it myself. I do, however, take issue with people who just, they know fine well Chris just sits on his arse. This argument is most common among the more white knight or social justice oriented crowd. Those who take this approach see Chris as a victim of the alt-right trolls, or whatever villain of the week has been created to oppress them. As such, to them, Chris is a beautiful, unique creature who is to be coddled and praised, regardless of the merit of said praise. Often this praise will be sycophantic in nature, with constant praise of Chris's artistic ability. I mean, I can't find it, but there you are. And creative genius. Another common narrative is that Chris is a grown adult who is perfectly capable of taking care of himself. No, he isn't. Easily separating the wheat from the chaff in regardless to orbiters. We'll let you decide how competent he is. Well, as competent as somebody who lets his house burn down, pepper sprays somebody over the colour of a character's arms, and then brags about having sex with his own mother could possibly be. So, no, I don't think so. To protect him from other enablers. Some enablers have already realised that it is impossible to communicate to Chris unless they can entertain his beliefs. So they attempt to assist Chris by, at first, playing into his own fantasies, and then subsequently attempting to dismantle those fantasies from the inside, or encourage less harmful ones. However, attempts at doing so have mostly failed. Arguments against enabling Chris, and there are quite a number of these. Whether you intend to help Chris or not, make him fall further into his delusions, or attempt to pull a liquid Chris on him by playing along with his delusions, there are a handful of reasons for why enabling Chris generally is not considered a good idea by most people. 1. Enabling Chris gives him a motive to never change. It goes without saying, but if one's beliefs are confirmed all of the time by the people that surround them, they have very little reason to change the way they are. This kind of helping Chris is what made him so egocentric and puerile in the first place, and that was when it was just his parents enabling him. Even if you do have good intentions and a genuine desire to help Chris, This way of helping is ironically one of the most harmful things you can do to him, by reinforcing the delusional state of a mentally ill person. You are doing nothing but unintentionally making their life worse. On one hand, fantasy enablers will play into Chris's desire to relive his childhood. On the other hand, financial enablers will constantly donate him money out of guilt. The actions from both groups combined have made Chris deny any sort of adult responsibilities because it made him believe that he can sit on his ass all day daydreaming, as other people provide his basic needs for him. The impact of the idea guys has been catastrophic to both Chris's mental state and the Sonichu universe. In recent years, Chris's mental state has deteriorated from fantasy-prone escapism to complete detachment from reality. Chris has become so delusional that he believes he is married to several Sonic recolors and a Pokemon as part of a polyamorous marriage, is a goddess with psychic powers, and is worshipped by millions as their lord and savior. By indulging Chris, that is, encouraging a 42-year-old man to believe he is really a deity and anime character after he was tricked into thinking that, in the first place, you are only making things worse, and even helping to perpetuate the idea guy's machinations. When a person has deluded themselves into a belief that is potentially harmful to themselves and others, the best thing to do is not to reinforce said delusion, but rather to get the person professional help. Telling him that others agree with his nonsense only causes him to become even further detached from the real world than he already is. Agreeing with Chris that he is the holy patroness of a computer from the 80s and that cartoon characters will soon start showing up in the real world has also proven a prerequisite to interacting with him for any extended period of time. Even if you do not intend to indulge in his fantasies, you cannot interact with him normally to undo any of the damage done by enablers. The guard dogs, who originally intended to keep Chris from getting manipulated again, also needed to play along by alleging that Chris's amethyst ring was causing psychic chaos to gain their position over him. Most who are willing to play along with Chris in this way would justify their actions to third parties by professing they are doing this to help Chris in the end. Unfortunately, despite their efforts, Chris had refused to cooperate with them any further, and decided to go back to his fantasy world and continue falling for their other enablers, no matter what they said or did to him. Rarely does interacting with him yourself to tell him about your world clashing with his create the same effect as him getting angry over a minor character design alteration, or getting irrationally mad at a non-existent enemy. In the past, some of the best Chris content has come from his own head and actions. Most of the time, he is not even bothered by it anymore, seeing it as another happenstance in the world he created for himself. This proves that by enabling Chris, you are doing the exact opposite of what triggers the best of Chris by giving him what he wants or further confirming him and lulling him into a sense of complacency where he is less likely to produce anything meaningful and or entertaining content. Chris will always try to get what he wants, whether or not it is good for him. To add salt to an open wound, Chris has previously stated that trolling efforts from people like the Teen T Squad do not faze him at all, purely because they agreed with his views and were polite to him. Therefore, it would be insane to even think that trolling Chris in this fashion would get a laugh out of anyone. Chris also no longer believes in basic scientific principles, especially in the biology department, and already believes himself, and presumably himself alone, to completely understand the difference between what is real and what is fictional. He believes that all diseases are as a result of extreme stress, and that by being physically connected to a virus, he can completely obliterate whatever ails him. For example, when Chris got a cold in December of 2019, he believed that the primary reason was this due to how he was triggered by the redesigns of his Sonichu characters by Project SNT. If Chris gets inflicted with a disease, he will tell himself that said illness simply arose from his emotions and disturbances from other dimensions, as opposed to acknowledging he's ill and taking steps to help himself. To continuously try and enable him with these beliefs, Chris gets put at risk of suffering even worse ailments, without the proper care of treatment. Thus, when you enable Chris's delusions, you are directly putting his life in danger. The knowledge gap between you and Chris. Since the very beginning, Chris has had difficulties in empathizing with other people, or seeing things from their point of view. This especially holds true today. Where he has become absorbed within his fantasy land, some fantasy enablers, particularly in the artist community, might believe that they are not doing any harm by drawing fan art or fan comics that Chris likes. However, these people are fully aware that what they draw is simply fiction. Chris is not. Chris doesn't care about your fan art the way you think he would. He now sees it as evidence he can use to confirm his beliefs about the universe. Directly giving Chris fan art encourages his retreat from reality, as he then spends time astral projecting to the dimension he believes the artwork depicts instead of working on improving his real-world life. There is nothing inherently wrong with creating fan art of Sonichu or Sonichu characters. However, doing things such as creating a persona on Twitter, aggressively pushing your art onto Chris, and role-playing with him as your character does make it highly likely that Chris will use the art as an excuse to recede deeper into his fantasy world. Getting sucked into drama surrounding Chris. The time and energy spent on getting sucked into drama just to see who can influence Chris the most is one of the classic signs of enabling. Because of how trolling Chris is the one-way ticket to fame for some, and due to the amount of people going by the idea guys techniques, there have been a constant power struggle between groups of enablers vying for Chris's attention. Enablers have been trying to ward off from one another in order to reign supreme. An example is a group with Jacob Sockness and Sarah and Steve clashing against a group with NKR Night V and Aqua Diamond 8. Sockness, perceiving MKR Night V as a barrier to his schemes, embarked on a smear campaign maligning her to Chris and nearly succeeded. MKR Night V found herself in the precarious position of both doubling down on her alliance to Chris's beliefs to keep her in his graces, while trying to convince him that the parts of his beliefs that Sockness planted into his mind were invalid, representing time and effort going into enabling. As you may have guessed by now, this is a very sad situation to find yourself in. You are fighting endlessly over the same weirdo who does not care or know that people are fighting over him, and you are putting yourself at risk of becoming massive troll bait yourself by doing it. You won't be able to influence Chris forever. Chris's fantasy beliefs getting validated just leaves an opening for others to eventually use down the line to manipulate him. An example is how a wave of copycats sprang in the wake of the ousting of the idea guys, with several successful adapting their tactics to circumvent their efforts of the guard dogs to prevent Chris. A related example is MKR Night V, who took a page from the idea guy's playbook, pretending to be a CPU goddess to align herself with Chris's beliefs. MKR Night V claimed the charade was for helping Chris. However, by feeding into his delusions, she made it easier for others like Jacob Sockness to tap into Chris's beliefs to manipulate him in another direction. You will always be assumed to be acting in bad faith regardless of your motives. Due to how many White Knights and Weens have been using the same technique of playing along with Chris's fantasies, it has become much more difficult for Chris to determine if someone's been messing with him, or if they're genuinely trying to help him. Due to his continued facade of kindness towards other people, he will of course always go for believing them first until they betray him, which is rather sooner than later in most cases. Therefore, enablers are always placed on the same level of people like A-logs and Weens by Christorians, and are readily assumed to be acting in bad faith, no matter what they intend to do with Chris. The confidence built by playing make-believe with Chris has been abused several times, and made people complete laughingstocks on the internet as a result. Sarah and Steve, multi-dimensional White Knights, and Jacob Sockness would all get their foot in the door by affirming Chris's beliefs, in some instances pretending to be channel fictional characters from other dimensions, and then betray that trust for their own entertainment. Onlookers from Kiwi Farms and the Quickie itself have watched White Knights reveal themselves in fact to be weens many times before. The Quick community at large treats weens without mercy. Even if you are not like the many traitors in recent Christery, it is impossible to get through to Chris any longer without deceiving him, and such guile is not looked upon favourably. Others have poisoned it the well before you. You will be assumed to be acting in bad faith if you try to influence Chris for any reason whatever, and treated accordingly. If you fail hard enough, you will be laughed at by the internet. At one point or another, you will be caught in the act, and you are going to have to spill the beans on your elaborative trolling scheme. Before you can even do so, however, someone is likely going to stumble across some really embarrassing information about you when they are trying to track down your motives. Remember, if you enable Chris, you will be assumed to be acting in bad faith. So the last thing you would want to do is show off, especially when others tell you to stop. Most enablers do not appear to be aware of the dire consequences of sharing their brilliant plans on various sites that either target Chris or ones he regularly uses, and they thus become the site's laughingstock of the month, just by skipping this caveat in their plans. An infamous example of this is the failed trolling plan of Sarah and Steve. Sarah first got the attention of Chris by asking for a Rose Tune medallion, which Chris undoubtedly agreed to after they bribed him with a Nintendo Switch. Sarah then told Chris that she and Steve would move out to Virginia to be his only friends to help him out by giving him endless gifts and playing pretend with him as a means of further deluding Chris. This has brought them negative attention from trolls, even more so when they made a rise up and they try to get themselves noticed by other prominent enablers to be declared King of the Weens. Doesn't that just roll off the tongue? A more infamous example would be Jacob Sockness, an amateur sorcerer from San Francisco, who pretended to be sexually attracted to Chris. When he was discovered by Kiwi Farms in 2018, he became one of the site's most popular topics of discussion due to his many absurd obsessions and mannerisms. He too had a lot in common with Chris, being autistic, receiving a monthly tugboat, and believing to possess magical powers. Miss Cherry had also proven herself to be a target of ridicule after he had posted an inactive thread about him on the Kiwi Farms, just so he could leak his trolling plan and show off. The farms naturally did not approve of this, and were not reluctant to dox him. This was made worse when he decided to double down and continuously talk about how internet famous all of this would make him. So next time you attempt to troll Chris through enabling, always remember that you are at great risk of being a target of ridicule yourself. If you're successful enough, it can come off as just as plain depraved. Out of the 4 groups represented in the Unholy Tetrad, enablers are arguably be considered some of the worst in many cases. Just like with A-logging and carpet bagging, the biggest reason of all for why you should not enable Chris with malicious intents in mind is for the legal liability. For some enablers, enabling Chris is more than just a game to mess with his comics. It can get to the point where they realize they can use his gullibility as a tool to do such malicious things to himself. Some can even tell him to go as far as to telling him to commit abuse to both himself and to other people, as well as extort money from him. If this is to show you anything about enabling Chris with the intent of trolling him, it is that if you go far enough with this practice, you will become the villain, rather than the funniest guy in the chat room. Money given to Chris will not help sustain him. After reading the above, you might realize that role-playing with Chris will not place you on the trolling honor roll anytime soon. Yet you might still wish to help him, and consider some kind of monetary contribution instead. This is also a bad idea. Up until August 2021, Chris was adequately housed and fed, even if both leave much to be desired, and his monthly tugboat from the United States government provided him and his mother with necessary financial support enough that he, in fact, used to make more money doing absolutely nothing than the average household worldwide gets for an entire family's labor. He certainly was not destitute. Chris's relationship with money is unhealthy. While he has not got himself into as much of a bind as Bob has, he lacks the forethought to save money for the future and attend to his financial affairs in a responsible way. He often spends his money on frivolities and then turns to his fan base to pay for necessary expenses that he could have covered himself, and he not squandered away his money. While concerns for what will become of Chris after his mother passes are legitimate, Chris evidently shows no concern for planning for his future when Bob is no longer with him. And any money that you give him now to help him secure his future will be frittered away on My Little Pony merchandise or video. Giving him more money now just teaches us that he is free to live beyond his means without a shred of responsibility, because people like you will be happy to foot the bill. Your money will be wasted in Chris's hands and is best kept out of them. As of November 2021, Chris is currently being held at the Central Virginia Regional Jail and is currently awaiting trial for the charge of incest. Arguably, jail food provides as much food needed improvement to his regular diet. As such, spending money to his inmate account would likely be spent in nothing but junk food from the commissary. Now, I know that probably this article would need to be updated, but as of June 2024, Chris is in Lynchburg. No, he's in Lynchburg, Virginia, and he seems to get an undisclosed amount. For it can be argued that after this whole affair, Chris is basically trying to stay on his best behavior. But it is also unclear about just how much he is receiving in terms of his depleted tugboat and what exactly he is spending his money on now that his Patreon is no longer fitting the bill as either. And finally, it's just not worth it. Seriously, don't even bother playing pretend with Chris at this point. At the end of the day, he's a seriously mentally ill individual in his 40s. And is in dire need of assistance from professionals. No matter what zany scheme you can come up with in an attempt to bring back the good old days, the fact of the matter is that attempting to feed Chris's delusions is a bad idea. Those days have long since passed as Chris progressively deteriorates. Playing into his psychosis to help him invent new ways to humiliate himself and become increasingly deluded about his place in the universe solely for your entertainment is not something that should be encouraged at this stage in his life. Likewise, it's repeatedly been established that the vast majority of attempts by trolls to trick him into proving himself in the long run have ended up being futile at best and damaging at worst. At this point, it appears that Chris is the only person who can seriously work at fixing his life, and tragically enough, he seems to be more comfortable living in his room or living in his own little world than rethinking his life to ensure a stable future. Realistically, something that I could just about say from the very beginning, but let's be completely real, ladies and gentlemen. I know that, and you know that. That's one of the saddest parts about this whole story, is the fact that if Chris didn't have anybody who was willing to pay through sympathy or pay for services that they know that Chris historically would have issues in fulfilling, Chris would have been shit out of luck and he would have been on the streets years ago. Chris doesn't seem to understand any of that for how it sounds and has continued to act very much the same as before, with no real recourse and no real happenstance for the things he should have learned or the things he should have taken upon himself. I can at least say, just to end this, here is the world that awaits you if you decide to make all the wrong choices. And with all that being said and done, I hope to see all of you guys again in the next video. Take care, and bye-bye for now. And finally, we come to the final article of the Unholy Tetrad, the aspect of weaning. What is weaning, you may ask? Well, let me demonstrate. Are you 6 years old or something? Bob Chandler outsmarting a ween attempting to prank call Chris. Don't worry about those weens. You know, you're safe around me and my loves. Chris attempted to persuade a fan who weens won't hassle them at BronyCon. Weening, or fail trolling, is the act of attempting to troll someone, but ultimately failing at it while the whole way through, and not receiving any significant results, typically due to inexperience with lolcow culture. The people that do this are often referred to as weens, not to be confused with the alternative rock band. A corruption of the phrase epic win, weens are wannabe trolls who attempt to recreate the antics of prominent trolls, without being aware that there was much manipulation behind the scenes to goad Chris into performing for the trolls, and therefore just embarrassing themselves. Think we're exaggerating? Well, maybe some videos will get to the point.
Fucking pick up, piece of shit.
Hello?
July!
What the hell is that supposed to mean? That you're an idiot?
Whoa. Are you Bob Chandler?
It doesn't matter who I am. Who is this idiot I'm talking to on the other end? You got some funny ass ideas of playing games at night on the telephone, don't you? Are you 6 years old or something?
So that's just one, and then okay, here's the other one.
Okay, I thought it was gonna go.
Oh, calm down. Paul's kind of like dying.
Keep it together.
You like Tuffy.
Hey, Chris.
I'm Batman.
Hey, Chris, why don't you get back on the internet? We love you, man.
Like you all.
I'm Batman. I'm Batman.
I mean, well, yeah, practically you get the point. Okay, so here it is, the beginning. Examples of weaning. Elaborate trolling plans that end up failing. Falsely white knighting Chris to befriend him and get whatever you want out of him. The Quick Protect Squad is a notorious example of this. Prank calling Chris. Double dumbass points if you just to yell July or Ian Brandon Anderson / something, or other ancient memes. Prank takeaway deliveries under Chris's name and address. Not only is this just unfunny for anyone involved, on top of wasting both money and food, but numerous restaurants in Chris's area, namely Papa John's, have blacklisted this address precisely to prevent this. A-logging. While not all weens are A-logs and vice versa, the two often overlap. A-log himself was as much of a ween as your average A-log in numerous ways, enabling Chris's fantastical beliefs. Chris's mind is already fucked up on its own merits, and people such as the idea guys have done more harm in terms of mental damage on him. Once again, please note that although not all weens are enablers, and vice versa, they tend to overlap. Making fake Facebook and Twitter profiles of people Chris follows. Spamming Chris's Facebook pages with random pictures of his old triggers to try and get a rise out of him, such as of pickles, homos, or Sonic's redesigns in Sonic Boom. Scathing emails, letters, or social media messages. Butting into conversations Chris is having with other people online, especially if he isn't doing anything particularly wrong at the moment, which is almost 99% of the time. This was sadly way too common with the doobie-doo-over saga. Attempting to contact people who once interacted with Chris but have since cut all ties with him, which include Megan, Joseph Cole Smithy, The Wallflower, Mary Lee Walsh, Adam Stackhouse, Michael Snyder, etc., and drag them back into the spotlight against their wishes. You could probably put Rocky Shoemaker in that list as well, because she doesn't really do wrong overall, I suppose. Terrible fanfiction that wittily deconstructs solitude and where it takes place as a saccharine dystopia. Sorry folks, but Aspachu, a girl who brought down the world, Solitude, the animated series, and Quick Collateral not only already do this, but I've already milked the concept for everything it's worth. It's time to move on. Terrible fanfiction and fan art that focuses solely on murdering Solitude characters, as seen in the picture down below, double dumbass points if focusing predominantly on the slaughter of Sonnies and Rosies. Mass reporting in an attempt to get his social media accounts shut down. Terrible fan art of Solitude that attempts to be wittily macabre by making it even more grotesque, gory, or perverse than it already was. Spouting tired old Chris memes in place where Christorians lurk, or even in places where most of the members don't even know about Chris. Either way, it's very annoying. Making frivolous or exaggerated claims on Chris's misconduct in feedback on sites like eBay or YouTube. Spoiling Chris's legitimate attempts at doing commissions and participating in contests or e-commerce. Sending Chris a glitter bomb. Sending letters for PewDiePie to Chris's address. Making terrible rap songs about Chris, harassing bronies whose content Chris enjoys into blocking him on Twitter, recreating his Wikipedia page as a social media experiment, spamming his tweets with "Where's the comics? He's not going to respond, so don't even try." It may be just plain sad to say, but even telling Chris to get a job has become ween lingo. And there's more. Hacking into Chris's YouTube account to upload a video of someone screaming Julie. Sending letters to Chris to persuade him into saying or doing things while under the belief he is Jesus. Translating Ian Brandon Anderson into a writing system Chris doesn't understand and telling him it's a blessing in another language. Writing a fake letter, claiming it to be sent by Chris in an undisclosed location, and directing it towards another locale. Funding a pornographic film about Chris. Who's doing pornographic films about Chris? Like, what? I'm gonna like friggin' like do my okay, no, actually, you know what? I forget it. I don't want to know. Leaving 1-star reviews on places Chris has visited because Chris visited them, suggesting Chris could start an OnlyFans. Absolutely don't do that. Who's suggesting Chris does that? Making fake obituaries stating Barb or any other historical figures have died. Chasing down Chris and trying to shove a camera in his face after seeing him in public. Bringing up Chris's affair with Barb during his live streams, especially when it has nothing to do with the topics. This has already been dated to the level of the aforementioned ancient memes. Donating your own money for the sole purpose of flashing messages like Julie and Ian Brandon Anderson something, or anything related to the affair of Chris's live streams. Telling Chris about his past lives. Prank calling Chris's mother Barbara. Worst of all, breaking the law and needlessly risking a life-altering criminal record in pursuit of lulz. This includes, but is not certainly limited to, vandalizing or trespassing on Chris's property, which includes egging his house, illegally recording telephone conversations, stalking and harassment of him, his mother and the rest of their extended family, stealing from them, extortion, or threatening them with violence or even outright murder. This also applies to aiding and or encouraging other weens or Chris himself to do so. We really shouldn't have to say it at this point, but for fuck's sake, don't do any of this. So, did you get all that, by the way? This is all going to be on the test. So, yeah, those are just the examples of weaning and what weaning is not. As annoying and unhelpful as weaning is, The term has ended up being severely misused by much of the quick sphere to the point where some consider it to be any form of interest or interaction at any point with Chris or the world relating to him and his misadventures. As such, it's important to keep in mind what actions are not considered the correct definition of the term. Casual observation and discussion of Chris and his circumstances in places such as this very wiki or Kiwi Farms, where they are permitted and or actually relevant to the topic at hand. Any trolling plan that actually succeeds to some extent, be it good or bad for Chris, original or cringy, etc. Asking basic repetitive Chris questions as a newbie, regardless or of if it's not to do with recent events or those from the classic era and such. Even the most devoted Christorians had to start somewhere. Coming up with the speculative Christory based on past and ongoing events. Making fan media, art, fanfiction, animations, cosplay, etc. of the Solitude series, so long as it's not exclusively perverse, grotesque, or unintentionally poorly made. And you don't go out of your way to show it to Chris. Helping to document and provide information on developments and occurrences in Chris's life as they come. The same goes for any corrections and confirmations with appropriate evidence of ambiguous and or unconfirmed information. Visiting public locations where Chris is well known to have been or is to otherwise associated with, such as the Charlottesville Fashion Square, Gear Hearts, the End Games, or Piedmont Virginia Community College. Of course, this is so long as you don't try to fail troll or otherwise harass anyone for info on Chris. If you do visit these places, consider doing some good out of it as well by supporting them and the local community through donating to applicable and or purchasing from them. And visiting 14 Branch Lane Court, so long as it doesn't involve illegally trespassing or trying to harass Barb or anyone who resides there. Arguments against trolling attempts. Now that we know what you're thinking, you're not one of those try-hard 13-year-old boys who still think that screaming Julie or Ian Brandon something at Chris, spamming his Twitter or YouTube comment section with pickles and other outdated catchphrases and memes, making and sending him badly made parody comics, or trying to rehash the Liquid Chris saga in the height of wit. You've come up with a great plan to really get under Chris's skin, bring back the good old days and all that shit. However, 99.9% of the time you should just shit can your trolling plans and move on with your life. Why, you may ask? Well, the Chris of today is nothing like his former self. Chris has gone a long way since the internet debut on the Something Awful forums. He has gone from a simple-minded man-child with childlike tendencies that made a bunch of comics which are so bad they're fascinating, to a jaded, chronically depressed and mentally disturbed hippie that's formed a small doomsday cult around said comics. It is important to know that Chris, although still very gullible and severely detached from reality, is, debatedly, still a thinking person. Whatever gets him riled up nowadays ultimately depends on the time and situation. Therefore, a lot of the commonly associated triggers he may or may not have had some time ago will not necessarily transfer over to the present day. It should also be noted that, because of this change in perspective, trolling hits differently in this day and age than it did before Chris lost his father, which is incidentally the point where most of Chris's most famous trolls opted to leave him alone. The general culture around Chris Chan himself has changed significantly as well. While past trolls like Clyde Cash and Liquid Chris were praised for a time, and are still fondly remembered and respected by those who don't see them as being as bad as Chris, the days of trolling Chris are as heteronormative, egotistical man-child have faded to trolling Chris as a mentally ill, self-destructive, broken shell of a human being. The only people to really succeed in gaining infamy comparable to the trolls of the classic era, such as the Idea Guys and Jacob Sockless, are subsequently derided as the perverted, exploitative abusers that they are, rather than treated as internet legends. The irony in all of this is that the most trolling attempts no longer faze Chris at all, and those that do somehow succeed are only viewed as further support for his cult. Therefore, you should never expect to be one of those cool kids just by fail trolling Chris. Times have changed, so it's best to move on to better targets. This leads us to the next point. There are, and always will be, much better targets than Chris. If you're willing to put that much effort into trolling Chris, why not make yourself useful and aptly apply that same effort to going after better victims? As much as the quickie analyzes and discusses in detail his numerous odd behaviors, personality flaws, Chris doesn't even come close to the bottom of the barrel of internet scumbags. Neo-Nazis and other hate groups, social justice warriors, abusive lovers and parents, scam artists, P-words and E-P-words, corrupt politicians and corporations, religious zealots, Z-P-words, and other animal abusers, hackers, script kiddies. What's script kiddies? And malware writers / distributors, gang members, terrorists, and other online recruiters, A-logs and enablers, and many other assorted shitbirds are much, much more deserving of concentrated trolling than Chris will ever be. Even if you don't give a shit who the troll bait it is, as long as you get laughs under lucricities, the Chris of today just isn't as amenable to trolling as he used to be. As discussed beforehand, the amount of effort you will need to put into navigating around his paranoia and autistic sensibilities would be staggering to say the least. And even if you do manage to bypass these obstacles, what is there left to do to him? Anything amusing about him has already been exhausted, except the shit he does on his own initiative, also discussed further below. All that is left of him at this point is a withered husk of a lolcow. As much as you may try to milk it, you'll be hard-pressed not to get only cobwebs, dust, and shriveled dead insects in return. With that in mind, you may as well just spend your time on another lolcow who hasn't been injured or inured to years of deceit and humiliation. For most aspiring trolls, the only reason to pick Chris over any other internet jackass is because he's relatively well known even today, and you have a ready-made audience available to appreciate your efforts. But that's just you being lazy, not some trolling mastermind. The Chris of today is not quite as gullible as he used to be. Granted, almost no one on Earth is as naive as Chris was in 2007. However, since then, Chris has gradually learned that when he's contacted by people claiming to be Shigeru Miyamoto, Batman, Vanessa Hudgens, someone from his past, or even his own relatives, chances are he's just being trolled. In fact, the naivete of the younger Chris has been swapped for an extreme distrust of anyone who tries to contact him, to the extent where he's even turned down legitimate attempts to get in touch by people he actually knew at high school or college. This hasn't been held at all by the Weens. According to senior trolls, Chris once contacted by 10 people claiming to be Megan at the same time, all of them claiming to be true and honest Megan and telling him not to believe the others. Chris also vets those who try to bait him with fake social media accounts of people he follows. Weens tried this during the Doopy saga, only for Chris to embarrass them by thoroughly debunking their claims, complete with evidence. As of today, Chris simply doesn't care about whatever hack-in-yard inane scheme you've come up with him, even if the most persistent attempts at bribery don't seem to affect him as much as they used to. Your idea is probably not original. Whatever your scheme is, it's probably not being done before, and most likely better. It's pretty much impossible to get to top getting Chris to believe that the president of Nintendo was interested in his work, or that there was a dang dirty imposter whom everyone else thought was the real Chris and stealing his richly deserved fame. Or convincing Chris to destroy his own life upgrade on camera in an attempt to claim $9,001 bounty that never actually existed. Or even simply pulling some strings to have Chris's father walk in on him masturbating. By and large, most modern trolling plans tend to be some incredibly minor variation on something that's already been done. Like, for example, what if we got his high school ring? Or what if we got him to see another parody of his comic? In short, you're just wasting your time trying to rehash older trolling events, because we've all seen it before. More importantly, so has Chris. So from experience, he very likely knows what you're going with it too. Weenery discourages Chris from producing content. Chris is at his most productive when he believes he has lots of fans and everyone, barring a few trolls here and there, loves him. Most agree that Weenery is determinal to this strange symbiotic relationship, and it is considered to be one of the predominant causes of the slump in content between 2011 and 2014. In that time, Chris entered a hiatus as a result of a combination of mourning for his then recently deceased father and a constant stream of weenery over the years that made him think of himself as a victim who wouldn't be able to do anything without being harassed. As a result, he became far more private, meaning barely any content for us. Only 4 years later, after 2011, did he re-emerge from his hiatus. It is also worth mentioning that Chris produces much better content when left to his own devices. Since his semi-retreat from the public eye after his father's death, and before he was jailed for incest, Chris has been prosecuted twice, concocted outlandish conspiracy theories centered on someone he hasn't spoken to for years, accidentally set fire to his house, eventually continued working on the previously unfinished Sonichu issue 11 again, and sliced his own taint with a knife, as part of a harebrained attempt to grow his own China. All of this without any impetus from the trolls. Likewise, let's not forget the entire Mary Lee Walsh saga, along with at least 2 different independent blogs of Chris's bizarre mannerisms and behaviors. What happened before he was even rose to fame? Don't try and rush the master of America's favorite game. If you fail hard enough, you will become a target for trolls yourself. Anthony A. Logato is the textbook example of trolling backfiring on the would-be troll. And it's important to remember that he would never have attracted the attention of the internet if he had simply toned down the vitriol enough to make it less obvious that he was absolutely obsessed with Chris. It was thereafter a fairly obvious leap in intuition to assume that someone with the level of hysteria and monomania over someone they had never even met would have some skeletons in their own closet. And as it turns out, A-Log had more than a few. These included terrible homemade YIF fanfiction featuring a tellingly moderately endowed fox, OC, a huge cache of disturbing cartoon Rule 34, a noticeable portion of which included underage characters, a laughably poor college radio show from which he almost got fired after being caught watching pornography in the studio, and a video where A-Log does an excruciatingly unfunny stand-up comedy bit, revolving almost entirely around attacking Chris and what the radio was playing at the time, all before a crowd who, judging by their reaction, had never even heard of Chris. Another more recent example of the same thing happening to a ween is the case of Michael Hurties. After a myriad of sock puppet accounts, spam messages to Chris, and anyone he conversed with numbering in the thousands, mostly consisting of outdated memes and ad hominem attacks, and enough angry rants for him also to be described as being truly obsessed with Chris, it naturally led to some digging. Sure enough, Hurties was revealed to be an unemployed furry who is even older at 53 years of age, even less mature and more prone to tard rage than Chris, and having a number of highly embarrassing things to his name, including criminal convictions and a newspaper article of him in a fursuit discussing yiffing. Consequently, he became a huge laughingstock overnight, not only turning into a lolcow himself, but it even got to the point where Chris himself dismissed Hurties, and by extension everything he'd done as an irrelevance. By the same token, Obsessive and excessive weenery is dangerously likely to get you noticed by other trolls, who will in turn start trolling you because of that and anything else they notice about you, hoisting you on your own tetrad. In other words, it's akin to plugging in a huge neon sign pointing the trolls straight to your collection of Goku/Anne Frank/fiction and boy band shrines. Even successful trolls can become targets. After several months manipulating Chris, the idea guys had their real-world identities exposed in the first half of 2018. Between October 2017 and March 2020, Kiwi Farms officially encouraged users to dox weens as a deterrent. Several would-be weens have been foiled this way, and their effects have possibly spread into their real lives. Chris himself also carelessly exposed those who tried to interact with him while remaining anonymous. Remember, there is an energetic community devoted to recording every facet of Chris's life and interactions. You will be noticed. And as covered in more detail below, the attention you'll end up receiving will likely be the undesirable kind, even if you do somehow catch Chris's attention. Due to her edgy behaviour, A-logging directed towards Chris, attempts at weaning Chris, and spreading misinformation when faced with being doxed, Bella has been widely disgraced by the greater Quick sphere, probably by a lot of people as well, including probably the University of Texas as a result. Among other fucked up things that she's done. Even if you do succeed, you will likely regret it later. Chris-chan he's an enigma which to so many people, they thought he was a troll. Because they're like, there's no way this motherfucker is real. Because he's like the saddest human being ever. And it's sad because it's like, I spent 4 years of my life fucking with him. And people are like, bring it back. And I'm like, no, let it die. It's like depressing. It's not the golden age, it's the depressing age. Spaz Kid on the unwanted attention he receives from weens to this day. Also, there's been tons of things in my life I've regretted and hated doing later on. All of that stuff from 10 years ago was one of them. I've moved past everything that happened those many years ago, and obviously I'm a different person now. It wasn't funny and was a very long A-log thing to do. Nothing much else to say. Blue Spike on reflecting on his time during the Julie saga. But by the way, we're not even... Wait until we get the chance to talk about Blue Spike, because he says he regrets it, but whether he is actually like sorry for any of this is another matter. All too often, trolls that do somehow manage to succeed in extracting lols from Chris end up getting more than they bargained for. For example, Spaz Kid stopped making Sonichu the animated series when he began to pity Chris and realised he wasn't worth trolling. On top of a lot of unseen drama involving which the series writers and voice actors, but still regularly finds himself, as seen above, hounded by obsessive weens and A-logs to keep making it against his wishes. Liquid Chris may have to spend a long time fending off accusations from people outside of the Chris Champ bubble on tormenting an emotionally vulnerable autistic man for his own amusement. Despite, Liquid Chris's successes as a doctor to this day, Blue Spike will turn 30 someday, and even then he will still be thought of as the crazed sadistic pervert who, at the age of 13, willingly listened to a 27-year-old masturbate repeatedly for hours on end and forced him to shove a broken clay medallion up his ass. Even after, I should say, he has since considerably matured and openly shown remorse from his previous actions. Blue Spike, I just want to let people understand that Blue Spike is only 2 years older than me, so he'll be 28, I imagine. The idea guys may have to deal with many long-term legal troubles one day for manipulating a mentally handicapped man into abusing himself and extorting frivolities and large sums of money from him, all for a stupid cruel joke that amused no one but themselves. To add to the irony, people who didn't intentionally upset Chris are still getting unwanted attention from weens. Do you think Adam Stackhouse enjoys being inundated with various unwanted You prevented Chris from R-wording Megan. Congrats. Messages in his email box, especially since he openly made peace with Chris in 2018, or that Mary Lee Walsh appreciates seeing herself as a nubile anime blonde who exists solely to torment a virgin with rage every time she or her students uses Google, or that Michael Snyder likes being constantly reminded by Weens of being harassed and hit by a car through misguided attempts to praise him, or being tormented about said events almost a decade later, I should say, on the guest book of his own father's funeral. In all of these cases, the answer is a big fat no. And finally, there is absolutely nothing left to gain from Chris or the community surrounding him. What is probably the most simple grounds of all to not wean is also the most important for a number of reasons. As seen above, not only does Chris no longer have amusing reactions to anything that comes his way as in the past, he is no longer in any position, or condition for that matter, to produce more art, comics, or commissions for people to look forward to, and can no longer be considered someone to even ironically root for. Ever since his fall from being a comedic and sometimes morally questionable but mostly harmless buffoon into a truly indefensible and disturbing individual, apart from what he sporadically writes or rambles about in his letters and phone calls from jail, the wellspring of anything truly fascinating, endearing, or amusing about him has long since run dry. Ever since Chris has been known to have hard sexual relations with his mother, weaning and A-logging are considered to be especially pathetic. The law itself will now officially deal with Chris properly, as opposed to a ragtag lynch mob of idiots on the internet who now, by and large, have no access to him anymore regardless. And the need to prove oneself as superior to or otherwise be associated with an obese, unrepentant sex offender with a rapidly flatlining grip on sanity reeks of desperation for attention now more than it ever has. All of this isn't even getting into the likely results of trying to wean or otherwise going out of your way to coax reactions or information from Chris nowadays. Not only do you have the active Christian community, who are more than willing to come after most wannabes who attempt to do so, but also how the consequences will, in such circumstances, very likely end up spreading into your actual life, as has been some of numerous occasions. Even without going on with the intention to troll, fan documentaries and information sources, such as this very wiki, already extensively cover Chris and his life. And when new events and such occur, it's more likely already covered by them without you needing to dig too deeply. With that said, if you do have worthwhile information, corrections and confirmations of such to provide, then by all means do so. The same applies for items such as Solitude-related fan media, on the condition that they're kept well away from the man himself. But you should always keep in mind that however you choose to go about it, with so much to potentially lose and so little to gain, if anything at all, obsessing over and trying to get directly involved with Chris nowadays just is not worth it. And with all that being said and done, I hope all of you guys have enjoyed listening to the Unholy Tetrad of don't getting involved with Chris, trolling or enabling him or weaning him in any way whatsoever. And hopefully the points have been made and, well, the damage has, well, already been done. Take care, and I'll see all of you guys again next time. Take care, and bye-bye for now. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and from what we were speaking of yesterday, talking about the Unholy Tetrad, we have decided, well, I have decided what I was going to do is to actually break down the subsequent categories of trolls, enablers, and everything in between into sort of separate videos, because these sorts of things need to be broken down, exemplified, just to showcase to people, well, what not to do and what it looks like when you try to do something for Chris. So, you've heard it from me first, so let's get started with what's referred to as white knighting. Pro tip. As good as your intentions may be, there is no conceivable way any old E-friend can reach Chris at this point and change him for the better. Certainly not by continuing to ass pat and pamper him, which is precisely what fucked him up so badly in the first place, as this wiki evidences copiously. Chris blocked me too. We defend her, buy from her, and encourage her, a truly repulsive person. Former White Knight David 906379747. Also, White Knights during the Miscreants era were subverted. Their messages blocked, deleted before Chris could see them. If they got through, trolls would leak their conversations with Chris and accuse the helper of being the culprit. Marvin, also known as the guy in the pickle suit, one of Chris's former trolls. White knighting is a term used to describe the act of going on the internet to help or defend someone else against other people, out of pity or compassion, or for ulterior motives. People who do this are often referred to as white knights. White knighting of Chris is especially prevalent because of the sheer volume of abuse he's taken ever since he found his Encyclopedia Dramatica page in 2007. That is accurate. Thanks to events following from the idea, guys, most white knights now fall into a subgroup referred to as anti-trolls. Those who try to ward off other trolls and tetard members away from Chris to have him for themselves, rather than for noble pursuits. These are not to be confused with any other subgroup of white knights, counter-trolls who primarily fight against trolls to protect Chris, rather to troll him themselves. Counter-trolls are those who take Chris's side to spite his trolls. Some do this because trolling one gullible idiot is less satisfying than trolling trolls, who actually have the ability to understand what is going on. Others have decided that Chris has jumped the shark and are trying to make everyone else leave him alone to put a stop to an old meme which is effectively gatekeeping. In the broader internet trolling community, a wider range of people, from neutral observers to even his greatest trolls, are accused of being white knights. This is mostly due to Chris's fans discovering weaning, enabling, and A-logging, acts which, to outside observers, could be misinterpreted as an attempt to reduce trolling. Many of these outside observers are also confused by the tendency of Chris's trolls, including his most prolific ones, trying to get him to improve his life, as they don't know Chris well enough to know it's nigh impossible to get him to improve using the soft touch. When the label White Knight gets thrown around, take it with a grain of salt. A meta topic within the broader Chris saga has been the merits of attempting to help Chris stop being a lolcow, and whether he is deserving of such assistance or even beyond help. Opinion on the matter is somewhat divided on whether Chris is capable of improvement, although most agree that if Chris was going to improve, it will not be in any large part due to the efforts of third parties who only interact with him over the internet. Some believe that Chris was improving on his own, albeit slowly and in small increments, as seen in his gradual abandonment of his homophobia, which began him declaring tolerance for lesbians, which he eventually extended to gay men. Others believe that Chris had not tangibly improved and that he has merely moved sideways rather than forwards. Chris showed signs of improvement from mid-2015, having found a new hangout where it seemed he was finally making friends and improving his social skills. Moreover, he finally found a way to cash in on his E-fame, delighted his fanbase by resuming the comics, and made his dreams of a solitary media empire a reality, albeit probably on a much smaller scale than he ever once envisaged. Since Chris's arrest for incest in 2021, many of his white knights abandoned him, and he is now at the mercy of A-logs and weens. So as far as like his general introduction goes, that's pretty much a lot of the basics you're probably going to know. And as bad as it may seem, Chris, it's not really, the problem is that it should not come down to us for Chris to be better. It should be down to Chris himself to decide if he wants to be better or not. But better is a very, very broad way of putting it, and there's no other way of putting it. Chris has got to do it. Whatever it is, it has got to be down to Chris. It's not right and it's not fair for you or me to suddenly start deciding what counts as Chris being better. Even if our intentions are absolutely that, for Chris to improve for the better, unfortunately, that's out of our control and it's out of our interests. It should not be, it's not our job to make Chris's life better. That's not really what it's about. Motives. Pity/remorse. Following the release of Chris's first nudes and the video in which he reacted to the loss of medallions and Blanca, many people, including trolls, felt sorry for him. They had not expected it to be as possible for him to be trolled so hard or for him to appear so shattered. Empathy. The internet is full of autistic people, man-children, and self-absorbed morons. Many of them are right here, fascinated with Chris. All of them see something of themselves in him, whether it's his obesity, his all-consuming need for female companionship, or his fervent belief that his homemade comics matter. A lot of white knights have made at least some of the mistakes Chris has made and have since wised up. They think they can help improve Chris by offering the benefit of their experience. Circumstances beyond Chris's control. Chris fails to identify people. A possible sign of prosoxnasia. Julie and her brother Max used the same voice, and yet Chris couldn't recognize that they were the same person. Emily played numerous real-life trolls, and yet Chris fell for every one of them. Pictures of different women were used to depict Blanca, and yet Chris thought they were the same person. Chris believed the pictures of Megan Fox were of Vanessa Hudgens. In high school, Chris memorized his appearance in the mirror because he had trouble recognizing himself. Since he's never updated his self-image, this is a possible explanation regarding why he denies being overweight. Chris's autism also means that he thinks and sees the world in simplistic binary terms. He cannot easily read between the lines or detect sarcasm, or practically any kind of nuance or subtlety. He interprets Family Guy as actually being against homosexuality. When two male acquaintances at the gameplays exchanged sarcastic homosexual remarks, Chris concluded that they were gay. It is also thought that his decision to go tomgirl was at least partially due to him taking advice to get in touch with his feminine side, quite literally. The trolls are even worse people than Chris. Another frequently heard line of reasoning is that the trolls have gone way too far, and have demonstrated that they're even worse than Chris, or at least equally pathetic. For example, Blue Spike's sadistic abuse of his control over Chris outraged even trolls. The less sophisticated bulk of the trolling was the work of A-logs and weens, who are frowned upon even by trolls, and rightfully so. Of course, who really has no life here? Chris, or the people who obsessively document and debate everything he does? Attention whores. Some of these white knights, the aforementioned anti-trolls, desperately seek attention from the community that surrounds Chris, sometimes faking their protecting of Chris. A lot like enablers, these people cannot contribute anything to society and therefore will never get a Wikipedia page of their own. So the Quickie or Gino's documentary series is the next best alternative. White knights with attention on their mind often pretend that they are protecting Chris for noble purposes, when in actuality are trying to gain confirmation from the community through morally questionable techniques. Arguments against white knighting. Chris is beyond your ability to help at this point. The trolls that allegedly wanted to teach Chris some unpleasant truths about life, along with previous white knights who wanted to shield Chris from criticism while generally wanting to prepare him for the real world, have consistently come to the conclusion that Chris is simply incorrigible. Nothing helpful that anyone says or does has actually stuck with Chris in a long-term capacity. While he is more than willing to pick up more harmful habits, even Noel, the closest person who Chris had to a friend since the trolling began, and who as the only advisor that Chris would actually listen to, came to the conclusion that Chris not only refuses to learn anything if it even slightly inconveniences him, but he is actively malicious and will ignore you or betray your trust if it benefits him. AKA, as long as he can get away with it, that's all that matters. That's how Noel sees it. Even medical professionals are believed to have had a hard time helping Chris. particularly when considering that Chris was just as delusional after 3 months of time in a psychiatric hospital as he was going in. While Chris is a victim of circumstance, this is true, he can only get help if he actively and actually seeks it, and that feels like extremely wishful thinking at this point. I know it's probably against things like the state to say that even at 42 years of age, Chris is too old to be seeking help. That's a barbaric thing to say, but it's also a barbaric thing to suggest that, well, why now? Why would Chris want to turn his life around now? And also, you know what I mean? It's the idea that probably, well, who's got the time? And also, I think it's just Chris is 42 years of age as of the making of this video. That's quite a long time to be alive, and quite a lot of time to have... I mean, what's Chris got to do at this point? He doesn't have a job. His credentials aren't particularly noteworthy. His criminal record is longer than his credentials, and probably even longer than my arm. And, well, does Chris even want to get a job? That's the thing. White knighting Chris now takes on a completely different connotation. An unfortunate shift in the character of Chris's internet advisories has developed in the idea guys' wake. Having caused Chris to believe himself married and as a goddess, traditional methods of reaching to Chris as pretending to be boyfriend-free girl have become obsolete. And in recent times, there have been an overwhelming number of people who are confident that playing make-believe with Chris will either help him in the long run or will turn them into trolling legends. Because of this newfound confidence built by playing make-believe with Chris, it has been abused several times, and likewise became the means of wedding them out. Regardless of their intentions, white knighting as a whole has taken a much more negative connotation in the Christian community than it has ever before. Not for the fact that you're defending somebody who is being convicted, though again, spending 2 years in the clink isn't exactly cause for celebration considering the nature of Chris's offences, but also it's because the fact that Chris has done what can only be described as unspeakable things, and it's why would you want... It makes the idea of it doesn't seem worth it anymore, does it? It's a pointless exercise. Protecting Chris from specific trolls does not automatically make you a hero in the Chris Chan saga. It goes without saying, but just because you divert trolls away from Chris doesn't exclude you from being a subject of critique, as you have involved yourself in the drama in the first place. No matter the intention, interacting with Chris has always been discouraged by the community surrounding him. Chris's story doesn't really have heroes in it. There aren't really heroes or villains in this, there are just people who make decisions, good or bad, and the consequences, whether they're good or bad. Anyways, it can basically be described as a sad tale of villains, victims, victims who become villains, villains who become victims, and those who watch the whole story play out. The stresses of white knighting. In order to get close to Chris, white knights have to spend at least as much time and effort as trolls to keep up to date on his activities. Most have to lie and pretend to be a goddess of another dimension or a random OC to even capture his attention. This, combined with Chris's habit of pushing away anyone who tries to connect with him, is enough to make any sane non-psychologist crash into slumber. A key example of this was the enabler MKR, who frequently came into conflicts with Jacob Sockless and his other enabling ilk while trying to warn Chris of the danger of letting Sockless get too close. For narcissistic reasons, as to some extent MKR simply wanted to keep Chris to herself. Regardless of whether they're white knighting for their own gain or out of some misguided effort to help Chris, white knights will find themselves experiencing unprecedented levels of stress. This is one of the reasons why many simply give up. Chris will not even read your message. Trolls had control over his emails. Messages sent to him by white knights were often deleted before he could read them. Even back in the days of the mailbag, any email submitted to it, if they even get published, would have been given one-word replies or simply ignored. Chris won't ever learn his lesson, no matter what you tell him. Due in no small part to the fact that Chris has been mollycoddled by his parents from the very beginning, and had his hand held through school by teachers who were sympathetic to a fault, he is flat out resistant to any harsh truths, pointing out his countless shortcomings and the objective fact that the general public, by and large, isn't going to absolve him of responsibility for his antics. He will not take a moment to reflect on his actions, let alone use memories of these experiences to avoid repeating the same mistakes ever again, because he is thoroughly convinced that he is a righteous victim of an unfair society that horribly mistreats autistics. Thus, anyone who goes against his ideals, i.e. denies him what he feels entitled to have, is an irredeemable villain in his eyes. As such, he won't accept any words that don't match what he believes in and or wants to hear. So even simply trying to be nice and reasoning with Chris won't convince him you're not a dang dirty troll. Even ignoring the numerous altercations Chris got into during his love quest, resulting in portraying authorities doing their jobs as one-dimensional villains for him and his League of OCs to triumph over, and the brutally honest tongue-lashing he received during the father call, a particularly notable example of a white knight unable to make Chris wake up and smell the coffee was none other than Vivian G. After 3 hours of trying to do just that, she eventually gave up, understandably equating the experience with fighting a war. Supposing that Chris does consider you to be trustworthy, that still doesn't necessarily mean he will benefit from your attempts to help him. A good example of this would be Rocky Shoemaker, who he considered to be better than a much-needed therapist, yet consistently failed to follow just about every word of advice she gave him. Her best efforts to prevent trolling schemes notwithstanding, going back even further. Chris fondly remembered Virginia Janine Sanford being his favourite middle school teacher, proclaiming her to be the most influential person of his life, who taught him better social skills, how to deal with your bullies, and so forth. He even kept her parting message advising him how to avoid showing others his weak points, and yet judging by the fact that this mere wiki exists, he obviously never took such words to heart. In short, as long as your words are not 100% in line with his childlike and egocentric points of view, it's utterly futile to try and help Chris. And finally, being overly nice to Chris might have mauled him badly and still does. Tempting as it is to feel sympathetic to Chris, at least until mid-2021, doing so would only benefit him from all the wrong reasons. Chris's youth wasn't one without acts of kindness from others, albeit mainly people who were, well, meaning yet misguided, at best, or flat-out spoiled him at worst. As a result of others generally opting to shield Chris from even the slightest negativity, with a few attempts at genuine advice going in one ear and out the other, he has grown accustomed to receiving or expecting to receive nothing but complete satisfaction with no strings attached from anyone who gives him the time of day. Not only has it led to Chris's tendency to become hostile to anyone trying to show him the error of his ways, and, of course, doesn't give him anything or everything he wants, but it has also allowed opportunities for enablers to entertain his bizarre delusions, only making him worse than he was before his online infamy. To make matters worse, it has even effectively created a paradox where benefiting Chris prevents him from getting what would actually benefit him, i.e., the therapeutic aid he needs but refuses, so even the best of intentions will ultimately yield no positive results whatsoever. Examples. YouTube. Among the most notable of Chris's white knights was a YouTuber counter-troll who claimed to be a 21-year-old Russian model named Savenka. Via her YouTube account, Hottie96, she released an inordinate number of screen caps from trolls' conversations on Financhu IRC, including private conversations between Chris and Panda. She also released an image of the man in the pickle suit who would later steal Chris's first date, Emily. Were Chris less thick-skulled and even slightly willing to accept irrefutable evidence, Svenka may have made somewhat of a negative impact on the organized trolling effort against Chris, but ultimately she was influential, Svenka also had an unhealthy obsession with the Quickville's library's original curator, Arjun van Derten. On the 6th of May 2009, YouTube user the xpincher x/north x star 7 / the pinches da bomb tried to blackmail major trolls, claiming to have information on them. He was easily called on this bluff by someone who had not trolled Chris at all. The Pinch has also threatened Blue Spike, saying he has information from his friends, forgetting the fact that Blue Spike has no friends. Facebook. In recent times, since 2012, Chris has taken to using Facebook as his main means of expressing himself. Inevitably, this has not only attracted the attention of trolls, but in 2013, a slew of white knights as well, in particular a Mr. William Elliot Waterman, who taunted the trolls to come after him instead of Chris. Spoiler, nobody did, because nobody actually cared what he had to say. Anna and Kim are two of the most notable ones on this friends list, both of whom try to offer constructive advice whenever Chris nosedives into a rant, when they're not busy kissing his ass, especially in the case of Anna. However, as we've come to expect of Chris, anybody who tells him something he doesn't want to hear are people that needed to be brushed off until they stopped saying these mean, awful things to him. A good case in point is his anger-laced tirade in September 2013, when he got thrown out of a Walmart and started calling names. The White Knights typically chimed in with their support until he revealed that he vandalized an Xbox One display in the store. Several of them then told Chris that this was not the right thing to do, and that the manager had every right to throw him out. His response to that: they did not, and if they do, they are the most in the wrong, because they are the most abusive and overzealous of their authoritative power they have ever existed. Chris's response to Chris Rhodes. TV tropes. The TV tropes article on Sonichu used to have a White Knight message as the first text of the article, with a link back to this very page. It was eventually removed due to TV Tropes' website policy changing later on. In other words, said message would no longer be allowed on the website. The message is reproduced below. Hey Chris, if you're reading this, you seriously need to get help from licensed professionals before the stuff you do gets you thrown in prison or forcibly committed. And we're sorry, but you have no real fans. The people you think are your fans are really either trolls or laughing at you behind your back. Every last one. Please listen to us for once. Concerned Tropers. Unfortunately, the editor in question fails to realize that their message, while well-intentioned, will do absolutely nothing, and Chris will simply ignore it even if he does fully read and input it for better development. Thank you for your time. In another move that appeared to be White Knight-ish to onlookers, the page was also locked in order to prevent Weens and A-logs from derailing a page about Chris's stupid webcomic, to instead flood it with a trope list covering his entire life, with entries on Chris and the effort to troll him making up at least 2/3 of the page, and as a result of overzealous editors piling on an easy target instead of talking about the comic itself. However, the mods took action not out of a desire to protect Chris, but because troping a creator in such a fashion was strictly prohibited. And going into Chris's life in such detail constituted an invasion of privacy. That was in direct violation of the site's rules. The subsequent cleanup led to several Solitude-related pages being locked, with the main page covering the work getting a milk-tossed and somewhat insincere message explaining that the article was being locked over excessive negativity, rather than the page flagrantly being warped by its editors to serve a different purpose than what the site was actually made for. Some Sonichu pages were eventually unlocked and the message was eventually removed, with the goal of actually providing examples of tropes in Sonichu being realized. Following the incest reveal, the pages were locked once more, and all discussion of Chris's personal life was prohibited on the threat of suspension. A recreation of what that page looked like before being overhauled by the mods of TV Tropes can be seen here. So we'll just take a very quick look at this. Carney. For several years, not only has Christian Headbugs been muted, but on their so bad it's good. However, the vast amount of edit warning, trolling, and complaining. The article contains subpages for Just Bugs Me, now called Head Scratches, in which the editors could raise questions about Chris and the wild mass guessing. So, because of just how... We will have to probably do an entire, like, separate article on that, because that's going to take so long to go through. Chris as a White Knight. In 2017, Chris himself began attempting to White Knight the crew of Planet Dolan, particularly Doopy Doover, after he misinterpreted one of Doopy's tweets after being tired of harassment from Chris himself as referring to trolls harassing her. To this end, he started the hashtag #HarassQuickDeveloper campaign, in which he exhorted the supposed trolls to take aim at him and leave Doopy and friends alone. This may well be a misguided effort to win Doopy's affections, after she emphasized that she considers him nothing more than a customer, not even a friend. He also bizarrely White Knighted himself in May 2020, while LARPing as Mewtwo, his second husband. Note that he did so as a brief interpretation of his marathon session of LARPing as Sonichu. Whatever the hell that means. And, by the way, that's like... For what that is, ladies and gentlemen, that's practically it to describe White Knighting as we interpret it as. And the best I can possibly say about this is that you shouldn't really feel... You can feel bad for Chris, but you really shouldn't, because even though there were some things that were absolutely out of Chris's control, the things Chris was in control for stand out slightly even more than before, because, well, if Chris knew Chris should have known better in circumstances like these. But there you are. And again, while you may think again it's probably going to try and help him, it really won't, and I don't think Chris will even care either, because he will immediately start begging literally the very next moment. And with that being said, I hope you guys have enjoyed this article, and I cannot wait to see all of you guys again in the next video. Take care, and bye-bye for now. And finally, to conclude the Unholy Tetrad or Tetrad of comments and, well, a lot of bad things about Chris, which is not really Chris's fault, but it's an indirect situation involving Chris. We need to cover this as well, just like we've covered his enabling, his White Knights, and let's go straight to it, shall we? Let's strike while the iron is ready. Pro tip: expressing disdain for Chris following his alleged appalling actions against his mother is not the same as A-logging. A-logging is still as unadvisable as it is before the leaks. Don't do it. What Saddam did in the Gulf War was small potatoes to what Chris has done. Well, that's clearly not true. A-log providing a helpful example of A-logging by comparing himself to a war criminal. He who fights with monsters should look to it that he himself does not become a monster. And you gaze long into an abyss, the abyss also gazes into you. Friedrich Nietzsche, Beyond Good and Evil. A-logging, named after noted Chris Chan critic Anthony A-log Logato, is a term... I thought Logato was a dessert. Is a term used to describe the act of overplaying or exaggerating the negative traits of someone lolzy at irrational levels. This often, but not always, includes expressing disappropriate levels of hatred for someone and or wishing physical harm on them, usually for perceived crimes that they are guilty of. A-logging also typically involves comparing oneself to someone noticeably lolzy or dysfunctional, and claiming that they're not as incompetent as said lolzy person. People who are suspected of doing this are often referred to as A-logs or A-loggers, and are considered at the other end of the spectrum from White Knights. Where White Knights try to defend Chris from trolls and help him to improve his situation, A-logs hold the belief that Chris is deserving of whatever scorn and harm he is subjected to, and then some. While once fashionable, especially when Chris was a relatively new internet phenomenon, A-logging has become associated with people trying to troll shield themselves. That's a phrase it just speaks for itself, that, doesn't it? Themselves. Like the original A-log, and therefore is looked down upon by Christorians. The shocking revelations that came to light during the incest saga have seen A-logging come back into vogue into some form. Though actively wishing death or physical harm upon Chris is still considered to some to be crossing the line. We'll get to that in a second. Etymology. This article is about the term A-logging, not about Anthony Legato himself. This section is only meant to provide context to why this aspect of the Unholy Tetrad is named after him. If you want to read an article about Legato and his hypocritical campaign against Chris, alongside other shenanigans, you should go read his Encyclopedia Dramatical page here. Anthony A-Log Legato is a YouTuber and voice actor who is known for making what can charitably be called commentaries on Chris. Commentary videos are meant to refute bad points and other opinions on an opposing view. What A-Log did was make videos where he reacted to Chris, pointed out the obvious, and went on tangents about how Chris is an awful person, and how he, A-Log, is better. Who needs to have harm inflicted upon him? However, A-Log's monomania led trolls to wonder what he was trying to hide, leading to them doing a bit of research on him. The result was that A-Log became known as Chris Chan 2.0, because, as it happened, he had many, many faults similar to Chris himself, and could easily be considered worse than Chris. Among other things, he is a furry porn connoisseur, has made terrible erotic fanfiction, is doing a laughable college radio show from which he was almost fired after being caught watching porn in the studio. Oh yeah, that's true, I heard about that. Was the subject of a leaked video of him doing a painfully bad stand-up routine, and much, much more. Ultimately, A-Log became subject to trolling himself, and he is the inspiration for this very term. At one point, A-Log even received his own wiki called the Logatopedia, which was relatively short-lived and unpopular. He also spawned the phrase "Hi A-Log," used to mock A-Logs and other internet tough guys. Aged 39, white American. Well, here he is. I thought literally he was like doing a parody initially by trying to dress as Chris, but no, that's Mr. Legato himself. Features of A-logging. There are a few qualities which are common in A-logs, and many of them can be seen in the original A-logs commentaries. Justifications for trolling Chris. I mean, there aren't really, but we'll hear him out anyway. Some would argue that it is sinister and just plain wrong to mock a mentally deficient person such as Chris. A-logs therefore try to justify trolling him by arguing that, regardless of his autism and other undiagnosed problems, he has shown that he is a bad person who deserves to be trolled. Some A-logs are themselves autistic, or at least claim to be so, and they can often be heard making arguments along the lines of Chris giving autistics a bad name. Others will appeal to his many instances of bigotry, most of them debatable, as reasons to troll Chris. By establishing that Chris is a bad person, it seems to justify that Chris not only deserves the treatment he currently receives, but also deserves physical and or psychological harm inflicted on him. While Chris is definitely not a good person and has done some horrible things, including cursing his ex-girlfriend for trolling him, which of course she didn't, hitting a game store owner with his car, macing an innocent GameStop assistant manager, and having sex with his own mother, it is still somewhat ironic that A-logs think the best recourse is to wish him death and curse him back. Not to mention, they tend to ignore the many factors that led Chris to behave in his way. Unsurprisingly, unbridled malevolence is never one of them, as discussed in further detail below. Troll shielding. Oftentimes, people who A-log Chris do so to troll shield, that is, to avoid becoming subject to trolling themselves. Like A-log himself, they tend to have many traits in common with Chris. They generally have an autism spectrum disorder. still live with their parents well into adulthood, which is somewhat justified now due to the instability of the housing market in the United States compared to when Chris graduated, are unemployed and are living off welfare, are sexually frustrated virgins, have trouble socializing and forming relationships, and or are fixed on cartoons, toys, and other things that most people their age would have little interest in beyond their nostalgic value. The only other exception I can find is those who actively work in those sort of departments, or those who do enjoy them for reasons that they can justify, etc. and stuff like that. Some people have even more faults than Chris, especially bizarre fetishes, as seen in the case of A-Log himself. However, A-Logs will argue that at least they are not like Chris, and are fervent in their vitriolic condemnations of Chris so that people don't troll them instead. More often than not, as in the case of the original A-Log, this backfires and they find themselves become the subject of trolling, standing up for groups that Chris misrepresents. Another misguided aspect of A-logging is the idea that bashing Chris is somewhat to the benefit for marginalized groups that Chris is a part of, most notably autistic and transgender people. The argument behind this is, in an A-logger's eyes, is that it needs to be pointed out that Chris does not provide an accurate representation of those kinds of people and their communities, and that as such, he needs to be ostracized. Of course, doing so is to little benefit of the groups that are actively being oppressed, and instead comes across as a flimsy excuse to aim at low-hanging fruit rather than to do something genuinely worthwhile to helping those kinds of communities. It should go without saying that making fun of or directly harassing a mentally ill weirdo on the internet is not going to help anyone's cause. Arguments against A-logging. While Chris is, to put it very mildly, far from perfect, it is generally accepted that calling for him to be harmed or abused like A-logs do merely legitimizes Chris's sense of victimization, and makes the A-logs themselves look sociopathic and unbalanced. And here's something I never thought I would have to say. Chris is not Hitler. We really shouldn't need to point that out. While Chris is guilty of actions that could be considered foolish, immoral, or downright reprehensible, being compared to people like Adolf Hitler is at best hyperbolic and at worst utterly insanity. Hitler was responsible for the death of nearly 11 million civilians during World War II. Chris's antics, depraved as some of them may have been, hardly compare to the atrocities committed by two feared and reviled dictators. For much of his life, he was just a gullible idiot who spent his time trying to hit on women very badly and make them his sweethearts, cross-dressing and playing video games. The revelations relating to the incest saga cause many A-logs, both past and present, to crow that they have been right all along about Chris, and that anyone who had defended or tried to aid Chris to any degree during the past decade and a half was guilty of white knighting him, and enabling his actions. While we won't argue that Chris's actions towards his infirm mother are totally indefensible, it should be noted that Chris's prior criminal activities largely consisted of things such as public disorder, traffic violations, trespassing, and petty assault. Arguably the worst thing that he has previously done was his hit and run on Michael Snyder, and even then, the court appeared to view Barb as the primary guilty party in the whole affair, judging by her getting the heaviest sentence of the two. It's no exaggeration to say that there's a massive leap in severity between any of Chris's prior crimes and what he is currently accused of. And while many Christorians have been naive as to the extent of his depravity, A-logs can hardly use actions no one could have reasonably foreseen as justification for their behaviour. There's no legal defence over attacking Chris for real. We really should not need to tell you that inflicting or threatening to inflict on Chris is nothing short of being illegal. Perhaps the best reason against A-logging is the legal liability, i.e. being charged with you and possibly convicted for stalking, terroristic threats, assault, or a myriad of other possible charges. Somebody asked me a couple of days ago why exactly people thought Daniel Lawson, for example, was going to be sentenced for 65 years. But, well, as I mentioned before, is that it's kind of not very good to why if there was no consequences for saying the things that Daniel Larson said, then well, what's stopping me from saying them, for example? And a lot more people would be saying them as well. But then how do you discern people who only say it and those who actually are going to plan to carry out that sort of thing? It's a threat towards national security. And again, it's undeniably a threat in the eyes of the law. And it doesn't really matter who it's going to be, whether it's the president, whether it's someone working for the CIA, the FBI, the law departments of any individual state. Don't do that, guys. Don't do that. Whatever feelings you may have against Chris, there is no legal defense for taking the law into your own hands, and chances are you will end up with a life-changing felony conviction. In addition to this, part of the charm of watching Chris is in his internal rage over a non-existent enemy. Committing actual violence would only legitimizes Chris's victim complex, and likewise would, in such a circumstance, make you the villain. Like A-Log, you can make yourself a target if you try too hard. Chris does share traits with a lot of people, and some of these traits are quite disturbing and embarrassing. It's a fair assumption that a lot of people who follow Chris's antics are unemployed losers on the internet. For example, a lot of people have seen Chris and uttered in their minds, "Finally here's someone who's more pathetic than I am," but make no mistake, that is a very low bar to clear. If you extensively go into how much you hate Chris and try to insert yourself into his shenanigans, the same people that you're attempting to impress will likely consider looking into your own shortcomings. As much as Chris is far from being likable, responding to his every move with unconditional hatred can make you come off as being just as much of a target, if not more so than him. Saying that you are better than Chris is not at all impressive, especially when you take into consideration just how much Chris fails at everything he does. Therefore, you should not be using someone else's character flaws in order to justify and excuse your own. This is especially true if that very same person has no bearing on your life as a whole, and are only comparing yourself to a relatively well-known lolcow to feel far less shitty in comparison. Before you fall into the fallacy of believing that vociferously condemning Chris will save you from his fate, remember that having embarrassing traits like Chris doesn't automatically make you subject to the sort of trolling Chris has had. It may make you subject to ridicule, but what's more important is how you respond to said ridicule. You could be like Chris and get blangry at every traitorous troll under Lucrisities, and give you the trolls power over you just like Chris did, or you could laugh with them at your own faults, or even just ignore them and go about your business. Trolls generally aren't interested in people that can't coax a reaction out of it. All in all, if you don't want to end up like him, A-logging isn't the way to do it, but avoiding the myriad of mistakes Chris and A-log made is. Also, Chris has stopped worrying about the hate he gets. For better or worse, I should say. Chris is too busy entertaining fantasies of godhood and the totally real dimensional merge to pay attention to tryhards who want to be remembered as the next Clyde Cash, and really wanting to be remembered as a someone who attempted to intimidate someone with a mental illness is absolutely nothing to be proud of, or worth aspiring to. Chris will be too distracted by the latest drama or monetary issue in his life to even pay attention to people who are obsessively angry with him. And even assuming that you actually get attention, there's little guarantee that you'll be able to engage with him on a long-term basis. What's ironic is that Chris has been so desensitized by his many enablers that it's not likely he even cares about the amount of hatred he receives by A-logs on a daily basis. Therefore, A-logs are often considered some of the most lols-worthy of the tetrad, particularly in the regard of them obsessively raging at a practically non-existent enemy and only succeeding in making themselves even more of a laughingstock. Much the same as what happened with classic era Chris against his own trolls. If whatever Chris really does really bother you, then the least you can do is calm your ass down and try avoid making yourself looking a fool from your obsessive hatred. Otherwise, you could easily become Chris Chan 4.0 yourself. Being better than Chris is not and never has been an achievement. As mentioned earlier, the incest allegations and accompanying embezzlement of approximately $750 from Bob are now considered by many the point where Chris crossed the line from being a buffoonish, sometimes morally questionable, but mostly harmless individual to someone truly detestable and indefensible. By that same logic, however, trying to aggrandize oneself by A-logging, Chris is even more of a waste of time than it was previously, to the point where it will have exactly the opposite effect. Trying to make yourself look better by comparing yourself to a fat, angry, prone man-child with incontinence issues and elementary school level drawing skills well into adulthood is the kind of juxtaposition that always rung hollow at best. But saying you're better than an incestuous sex criminal with a nose-diving grip on reality and close to 4 decades worth of unsavory information to his name is something so pathetic it can only make anyone attempting to look laughably insecure. The Hall of A-logging Shame. In this section, the Quickie has compiled several comments and plenty more to come from A-logs on YouTube and elsewhere. Obviously, you've never heard of what he calls other people who are autistic, and that he calls people with Asperger's, such as myself, fakers. He doesn't deserve some. He deserves everything for giving us a bad name. The trolls are also doing what they did to him for a good reason. It's not about autism to them, but more of what he's a moron who is evil reincarnate and deserves to go back to hell. I don't believe you know what All Quick has done to us on YouTube. Gamer XZ0 in a YouTube comment on the original upload of an A-log video. 29 years ago today, Satan was born and molded into the fucktardian penis we know and despise today. Should I ever see him, I'm gonna destroy him worse than New Jack did to mass transit. Okay, for those who don't quite get that reference, New Jack, who hasn't been with us now for 3 years, he basically committed a pretty heinous assault on a minor during a wrestling show at ECW in, was it Pennsylvania that they did the match in? Or anything like that. The idea was that Mass Transit was a 17-year-old kid who lied about being trained by Killer Kowalski, who said he was 21, and he and New Jack got into an altercation in the ring, which basically resulted in Mass Transit being beladed in the head, and New Jack beating him up with a toaster, a ladder. Oh, did he use a steel chair on him? I'm not entirely sure, but basically it was excessive, and New Jack ended the match by literally stomping on Mass Transit's belly by saying that, I hope this fat fuck literally bleeds out in the middle of the ring because I don't give a fuck. His words, not mine. Sorry, where was I? iSlaver D29, another YouTube comment on an older A-log video. Actually, I think prefer putting many bullets in this head instead. Hanitman on the future message video. Hooray, he's dead. Now he'll be spending his eternity in hell while I go piss on his grave. MXC82, again, another YouTube comment on one of A-log's older videos referring to Bob's death. Mostly because I was hoping the video would end with him getting shot dead by the Ruckersville police. You can imagine how disappointed I am to find him still alive and kicking when the video is over. CKO92 on YouTube reacting to the Lego High School video. You fucking brony piece of shit, go kill yourself. If I was your mother, I would have an abortion. Random letters on the Lego High School video. Yeah, some of these are straight up going into like the realms of hate speech, and to be honest, why Chris didn't, report any of these is a pretty good question, but I'm not entirely sure why. Chris Chan, you are the single worst human being who ever lived. If it wasn't for you, fellow autistics and Sonic OC creators like me would be respected by the world. What you have done is unforgivable. I hope Bob dies and you spend the last minutes of your life crying about what a pathetic failure. Fuck you. Official steroid Hedgie in a comment in Chris's YouTube account. I hope you are ashamed that a retarded autistic person just like yourself killed 20 innocent kids. All autistic people should be wiped out of the earth and aborted before birth, so you are evil, all evil. I wish the worst fates that heaven and hell can bring upon you and all of autistic pieces of shit like you. Real reply go forever in a comment in Chris's YouTube account comparing Chris to a man who shot up at an elementary school and advocating genocide. Guess whose house burned down today? Chris Chan. By Bad Webcomics Wiki, gloating on their Facebook page about Chris's house burning down. Ha 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 ha. A response by the Bad Webcomics Wiki when a troll calls them out for the above. Sadly, yes. Another post from the Bad Webcomics Wiki Facebook page when told that Chris survived the fire. Words cannot adequately describe my utterly all-encompassing hatred and disgust for the grotesque entity that is Christian Weston Chandler. You, Christian, are a shamelessly gruesome, inhuman monster. Everything you do and say only adds to your almost incomprehensibly massive list of atrocities. Were I to load up Sonichu.com or some other Chris Chan related news source and saw that you finally died a death which probably corresponded to what you've inflicted upon this world, it would be the happiest day of my life. Happiest day of my life. F you on I love you, Catherine. Listen, you fat autistic piece of shit. I've tolerated you so far because you're going to be my new neighbour, but this is the last straw. You trapeze around your yard carrying blow-up dolls and singing awkwardly. Not to mention I can constantly hear you screaming at your mother. I am serious considering finishing clearing this lot and selling this property to someone better equipped to handle someone like you. I was well within the city ordinances with this controlled brush burn. Also, if I see any other videos of me on my lot portraying me in a negative light, I will take up a libel suit with you. Max Slims trying much too hard to pretend to be Chris's neighbour. God, I fucking hate this piece of shit. I hope he dies. Jazz hands on the GameStop assault video. Why the fuck is he still alive? God, I mean, this guy looks ridiculous. He is also racist and an antisocial idiot that attacks people for no reason. And now he's a fucking burglar. What's next? Will he become the next Hitler? Rafael Gutierrez on the GameStop assault video. Yes, people, this is the person Chris's trolls have been white knighting and pussing out on trolling because he's had enough to do. He's had enough done to him. Seriously, give me a break. This guy is an asshole and deserves anything that happens to him because it's his own damn fault. The Mojo call on the GameStop assault video. Shut up, you fat ass. Go jump off a cliff and die. Boner Dix responding to a YouTube. Good. How many more of these are there? Why can't this fucking freak of nature just die already? Goggle Gin on the Best of Chris Chan Volume 1. One of these days, someone is going to beat the shit out of Chris, and I will not have an ounce of pity on him. I am actually surprised that the people of Ruckersville haven't gotten together to run Chris and Bob out of town. Someone strangle this fucker to death, please. I just saw a semi-censored version. Who the fuck makes these kinds of vids? He's acting like a retard and at the same time running around naked. I wish this man a slow, painful death. I don't care about the lols he gives. The man is disturbing, creepy, and should not be allowed to join society. Proof perfect that autistics should be dumped in the nearest alligator pit when their condition becomes apparent. Whatever happened to predictability? This crazy man-child doing weird shit each week. Now he's left the internet, someone tell me please. When will he die so I can throw a party? Bob's as mean as I've ever seen, and Bob is still coddling him. We've manipulated him for so damn long, he's like an autistic sim. Every time you look, every way there's a tard. There's a tard. A retard to bully. Every time you look, everywhere there's that face. Dead-eyed stare to troll and annoy. Video game nostalgia ruining what could have been a clever parody with arguably unnecessary hostility on Full House. I'd like to see someone argue that all human beings are worthy of a life after watching Chris's videos. Ugh, I hope Chris Chan dies a painful death and he makes the Japanese look like stereotypes. Chris put up a pay-per-view where you can cut the duck and balls off. People will definitely pay $100 to see it. This is so much more than hilarious. This autistic pig got exactly what he deserved for thinking he could ever fit in with human norms. Autism is a disease that needs to be purged out from this world. What a disgusting pile of shit this freak is. He got exactly what he had coming. He needs to be chemically castrated and put into a forced labor camp. Sonichu Maharafre. He should still be in prison. He should die there. Whoever bailed him out is just as bad as he is, and I don't want to live in a world where he walks free. And so on, and so on, and so on. To be honest, I would like to imagine in some strange way that this is only really like the really bad ones that have been like highlighted. And I could probably even multiply probably many of these by the score if I really wanted to. But I think the case has been I think they got the point across, is that there are some people who, now whether you want to say half of these or really if any of these genuinely meant any of the things they said, I honestly couldn't tell you. What is strange, however, actually thinking when you think about it, is the fact that, well, considering that Chris, even like during like his, even like before even 2009, Chris didn't exactly have the best reputation on the internet anyway, through his homophobia, his racism, and it's kind of hard to suggest why people would be like willing to accept Chris, because Chris doesn't exactly do a good job of trying to apologize with any level of sincerity about this. But what I will say, just to end this off, is that if you do genuinely believe you're better than Chris, just by saying at least you're not Chris, well, again, that's not really enough. If you genuinely think you are better, then you don't really need to say it. It's not about... It's called show, don't tell. Don't tell us you are. Just display it for your actions and we'll be able to see it for yourself. That's how we do that. So that's really about it, I suppose. I don't really have much else to go over, and that's kind of that, I suppose. So with all that being said and done, I hope all of you guys have learned something today, and I cannot wait to see all of you guys again in the next video. Take care, and bye-bye for now.